Hi everyone, my name's Matt, and with the recent downfall of Xbox, PS5 price increases, and whatever this is from Nintendo, a lot of people have been turning to PC gaming. With that being said, there are many that believe building a PC has to be expensive. Because of this, I set out to build a cheap gaming PC that costs less than a console and can play anything you throw at it. After a few weeks of part hunting, what I ended up with is a super capable gaming PC that cost me just $420. And while I did get some decent deals, a similar PC should be buildable for most people for under $500. This system can play pretty much anything at 1080p with 60 plus FPS and can even stream those games to sites like Twitch. So now that you understand what this build is all about, let's get into the parts that make up this cheap gaming beast. So this build all started with one great combo deal for a CPU, motherboard, and RAM that I got off of AliExpress that after discounts and a coupon came out to only $105. So what did I get for my 100-ish bucks? Well, for the CPU, I got the legendary AMD Ryzen 5 3600. This is a 6-core 12-thread CPU with solid gaming performance and a decent upgrade path. This guy released over 6 years ago in 2019, but is still plenty capable, putting out performance on par with a Ryzen 5 5500, which is a budget CPU still being sold new and being used in builds to this day. In terms of price to performance, in a budget gaming PC, this 3600 is about as good as it gets. The motherboard included in this combo is this A520 board from a brand that I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce, but it's spelled KLLISRE, which I guess is Kilser or Clisser. Getting this out, you can see it's about as basic of a board as you can get. It's got everything we need and not much more. We've got 2 RAM slots for dual channel memory, a 16x PCIe slot for our GPU with a 1x slot that could be used for a Wi-Fi card, and the back panel I/O again is perfectly adequate but nothing special. Finally, this bundle also came with a 2x8GB kit of Kilser DDR4 RAM at 3200MHz. This is a nice looking kit of RAM, and while it is only CL22, it will get the job done. 16GB is plenty for a budget gaming PC like this one, and with it being a dual channel kit with decent speeds, it should help us get most of the possible performance out of our CPU. For the $105 I paid to get the CPU, motherboard, and RAM, it was an amazing deal. I think this bundle is currently around $120 or $125, and even at that price, it's a solid value in my opinion. This combo makes a great base to build off of if you're trying to put together a cheap gaming PC that still performs great. To start out the building process itself, I went ahead and installed the CPU into the motherboard, then got out my cooler. The combo didn't come with a cooler, so I needed to get my own. I just went with an AMD Wraith Stealth cooler I had on hand, but could be purchased for around $10 on Amazon. If you have a few extra bucks, I would go for a tower style cooler as it'll help temps a lot, but this basic stock cooler will get the job done. Installing it just required me to remove the plastic brackets on the motherboard, lower the cooler down, tighten down the 4 screws, and plug the fan cable into place. With that, I could open up the 2 RAM slots and pop in my 2 8GB sticks of RAM into place one at a time like this. Next, it was time to install the SSD. At this budget, I decided to go with a 500GB NVMe drive in the form of this Team Group MP44L that I had on hand, but I'd recommend just grabbing the cheapest 500-ish GB NVMe drive that you can find that has decent reviews, which would cost you around $35 to $40. 500GB is enough for a budget gaming PC in my opinion, but it's kind of the bare minimum. It's enough for you to install your OS, applications, and a few of your most played games. 1TB would be preferable, but again, I'm trying to keep costs down and 500GB is totally usable and a fine starting point in my opinion. To install this, I just had to remove one screw, pop the drive in, hinge it down, and resecure that screw. With that done, I could grab out my case. If you're going for max performance per dollar, you should grab the cheapest case that fits all your parts and has adequate airflow, which should be around $30 or $35. For me, I decided to spend a little extra at $50 on this Raidmax Infinita i600. It's got the popular fish tank style design, 3 included RGB fans, and decent build quality for the price. Once I had it open, I could install the I/O shield, a few extra standoffs, and the motherboard itself. With that in, I could flip the PC over and grab out my power supply. After looking at all my options, I ended up pulling the trigger on the Seasonic SSR 500 for $35 off of eBay. This is a 500 watt 80 plus bronze rated unit from a reputable manufacturer, so it checked all the boxes I was looking for, as it'll be able to supply plenty of power to the build while also being safe and reliable. It's non-modular, but it is all black sleeve cables to keep things looking neat, With that being said, if you're not comfortable buying a used power supply, you could spend like $20 more on something like an MSI Mag 8550BN for right around $55. Once the power supply was in and most of the connectors were plugged in, it meant it was time for the GPU. This is the part I probably spent the most time deciding on. After looking at a bunch of options, I ended up choosing an AMD RX 6650 XT, which cost me $180 off of eBay. This is the MSI Mech model, which is a relatively basic dual fan design, but this card will perform about the same as any other 6650 XT. In terms of relative performance, Tech PowerUp lists this card as being about 6% slower than cards like the ARC B580 and RTX 4060, so it should be plenty powerful for modern 1080p gaming. Yes, this card does only have 8GB of video memory, but at 1080p this really shouldn't be a big problem at all. Is it ideal? No, but it's also certainly not the end of the world. These are usually available around the price I paid, but an RX 6600, which currently goes for around $150, would also be a good option. This plugs in like any other GPU and requires a single 8-pin power connector. With that in, I could neaten up the cables and was ready to boot the PC up for the first time. For a little over $400, this is a solid set of parts in my opinion that should give you a great experience in PC gaming. With that being said, there are a million different ways I could have went, so if you would have done something different, let me know what parts you would have went with in the comments below. So how much performance is this $420 PC able to produce? Well, let's find out. I installed an unactivated copy of Windows 11 and a bunch of games to see how this PC would perform, so let's get to gaming. Starting things off easy in Valorant, I tested at 1080p high settings, and by hopping into a deathmatch, doing this resulted in a 275 FPS average with 1% lows of 150, which is solid performance in my opinion and should be enough for competitive play. In Minecraft, I tested at 1080p fancy graphics with 12 chunk render distance, 12 chunk view distance, along with iris and BLS shaders. I loaded up a new creative world and just flew and ran around for a while to see what kind of FPS I would get. After a few minutes, I saw a 113 FPS average with not the best 1% lows of 32. Overall, this was fine performance, and Minecraft with shaders is totally playable on this PC. In Black Ops 6 at 1080p using the balance preset and the built-in benchmark, the system put out a solid 104 FPS average with 1% lows of 76, which was pretty good performance in my opinion and should give you plenty of FPS for casual play. Next is Fortnite, which I tested at 1080p in performance mode with far view distance and high textures. I went into a couple of Blitz games, and during those I saw an average of 210 FPS with 1% lows of 99, which was really good and smooth. Also, it seems like Fortnite hasn't been stuttering as much the last few times I've tested it, which is also great to see. In Borderlands 3 at 1080p high using the built-in benchmark, the system put out an 88 FPS average with 1% lows of 62, which was great. Next, let's talk about Borderlands 4, which is one of the latest and hardest to run games. I tested this out at 1080p medium by running around and fighting enemies in the starting area of the open world. Doing this resulted in a 63 FPS average with 1% lows of 46. There were stutters every so often, but that's to be expected with this game. In The Last of Us Part 2, I tested at 1080p high during one of the horse riding segments and saw a decent 60 FPS average with 1% lows of 50, which is nice to see another modern AAA title running on this PC at high settings with 60 FPS. For Monster Hunter Wilds, I tested using the free benchmarking tool at 1080p medium. Doing this resulted in a 64 FPS average with 1% lows of 38. This is decent performance, especially when you take into consideration how unoptimized this game is. In Cyberpunk at 1080p high using the built-in benchmark, the system put out a solid 98 FPS average with 1% lows of 65. In Marvel Rivals, I tested using the built-in benchmark at 1080p medium. Doing this resulted in a decent 64 FPS average with 1% lows of 47. Good enough for casual play, but I'd probably want more performance to play competitively. Finally, in Battlefield 6, I tested at 1080p high using the RedSec Battle Royale mode. Doing this resulted in a 78 FPS average with 1% lows of 47, which was totally playable. All in all, this PC performs great in my opinion. Temp-wise, the GPU is fine, but the CPU was creeping up into the high 80s a number of times, which proves that spending the extra $5-ish on a better cooler is the way to go. In terms of streaming performance, I tested streaming Fortnite, Battlefield RedSec, and Borderlands 4 to Twitch at 1080p. Doing this ended up causing about 5 to 10% less performance than just playing the games by themselves. With that being said, they were all definitely still playable, and the gameplay on the stream end also seemed smooth and enjoyable. Overall, this PC works great. For $420, I was able to put together a system that plays pretty much anything at 1080p with 60 plus FPS. Obviously, there are a ton of ways I could have went with this build, so if you would have done something different, let me know in the comments below. Also down below will be all the parts mentioned in this video, along with the alternatives also mentioned, so make sure to check those out for current pricing. So yeah guys, I think it's time to wrap this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.